Welcome to another Coffee with Samso, where we speak with ASX companies and the guys who run these companies. We're here at the UWA Club here on the campus of University of Western Australia. And I've got Riversgold Limited here with me. The CEO is Julian Ford. ASX code is RGL, and the current market cap is around 38 millions. So Riversgold is a lithium focused company, and they've got projects in the Pilbara and the Yungan. So, Julian, welcome to Coffee with Samso.
Thanks, Mel. Appreciate it, mate.
Thank you for your time. Look, Riversgold is lithium, as I said. Maybe we can get an introduction to who you are and a brief of Riversgold before we start.
Sure. I've been in the junior mining space Noel, since 2004. I floated my first company, which was active in copper gold in Africa, raised money in London, and since then I've worked all around the world. My background, I'm a chemical engineer rather than an exploration geologist, but I've been in the mining industry all my life, so about 40 years now working in the industry. And Riversgold is a company I actually helped a friend set up 2017. It was a restructured company. ASX changed its rules and we went with a clean skin rather than a restructured deed of company arrangement. And then in 2021, I resigned from a company I'd been running for 4 years, and we were very successful. And he asked me to come and take over. We're in a bit of trouble. We had some really good gold assets in Canalpi, just southeast of Kalgoorlie. But it was really expensive drilling under the salt lakes. The program was very successful. In fact, it was a technical success. We came up with an innovative way of looking under the salt lakes, getting alteration. It's on the Randall Fault, and in fact we got a R&D refund a couple of days ago for just over $500,000 based on that success, which is really great because it's going to fund 100% of our current 2,500 metres of drilling. We're just starting 1st November up in the Pilbara.
Okay. Look, the lithium space is sort of undeniably the place to be. It's been super hot for 2 years. And I guess, going forward in time, that's probably going to be the status quo. And there's many narratives that West Australia is the place to be, it's the Mecca. Can you share with us if that narrative how valid is that narrative?
Noel, it's very, as a chemical engineer, obviously I love the periodic table.
Yeah.
If you look one down from hydrogen, there's lithium, right? So it's the lightest metal around. So when it comes to mobile batteries, there's no substitute for lithium. So I spent the last 4 years in mostly North America and to a lesser extent Europe, but I got a really good feel for what was happening with EVs. Wasn't in lithium, I was in some other minerals in that space, but what I did get a really good sense for was how fast this transition to EV vehicles primarily was happening. And when I came back and we wanted to reposition Riversgold, I persuaded the board that we should look at lithium. And why I like lithium specifically in Western Australia is, I think everyone knows we're going to have a huge deficit. I mean, it's absolutely huge in terms of, the quantum of the demand versus the relative current supply. And in my view, there's no place like Western Australia to take a mine from discovery into production. Just the time frames, the green permitting, these days, especially with the brines, which is the major competing technology or mineral source for lithium. And so I think this boom in Western Australia is guaranteed for, at least 3 years, probably close to 5 or 8 years.
Okay. Which leads us to your projects. As I said, you got one in the Pilbara, the Tambora project. Maybe just give us a rundown on the projects.
Yeah, so the project identified was actually the Southern Cross project, which came in later in June this year, but we had a few technical issues, so it took us about 5 months from agreeing a handshake on the deal to get the lithium project in. Tambora really lucky. for a number of reasons. One, it's a mining reserve, so this was a gold mining area, 1890 down to 1895. So a lot of history for gold mining there. When we acquired the tenement, we didn't really appreciate just how much work had been done. So fortuitously for us, Taliesin, who own Greenbushes, actually had this project in 2005, 2006. They flew a hyperspectral survey of the area, which I had never been reported because of Sons of Gawler going into administration in and around that time. We managed to find that data and acquire it. When we then looked at the data that FMG had, FMG had done actually a really good job. They'd flown some really tight-spaced magnetics, and they'd also done a big rock chip and a stream sediment survey. Interestingly, the data was really good. I mean, we had 2% rock chips, but unfortunately I think the junior geo at FMG didn't understand that when you convert lithium to lithium oxide, there's a multiplier effect, and in fact 2% lithium is very good. So interestingly, FMG dropped the ground. We picked it up in a ballot, and January this year I tried a helicopter. We flew into site. Fortunately for us, there was a historic rock chip there, which we'd found from the data, and we literally landed on top of some lepidolite. We took 5 rock chip samples, closed the deal, listed the company, and then the rock chip samples came back, 2 to 3% lithium. So we knew we were onto a really good thing. I flew up a few weeks later with probably one of the world's experts in what we call LCT, so that's lithium, cesium, tantalum. Associate professor here at UWA, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Marcus Sweetapple, who's written a number of papers and in fact was one of the original guys helping the guys at Pilkingura in the early days, 2014 through 2016. So I flew Marcus up, we had a look at the ground, and we knew we were on the right thing. And the rest, as I say, is history. We've gone from discovery to now starting drilling in 6 months.
Now, so that people get an understanding, we were talking about lepidolite, that's spodumene. Can you tell us, what the business of lithium in regards to those two minerals? Because it's really different, right?
It is. I mean, the lithium and the spodumene occur together, and so you'll find all the mines that are currently mining hard rock lithium in Western Australia have lepidolite associated with the spodumene. Spodumene's popular because you can upgrade it readily easy through physical beneficiation, so you can take 1 to 1.5% ore body and take it up to 6% by floating it off. Lepidolite's a bit more complicated from flotation, and so really it's not that commercial, although about 30% of Chinese production currently comes from lepidolite, but really hasn't been exploited in Western Australia. Now, these two minerals occur together, slightly different, and you'd understand this as a geologist. Lepidolite is a phyllosilicate. It's got a hardness about 6.5 to 7 on the Mohs scale, so about twice of spodumene, and it also weathers a lot harder. And so what we found is, and the hypothesis was that where you see the lepidolite stick out at surface, that's because it's harder and it's much more resistant to weathering. What you should find below the surface is spodumene, and that's really what we'll be chasing with our drilling. When I had a look at some video footage, from high resolution drone of one of our first discoveries at a project called Line, I could see 20 meters apart were these two lepidolite, very thin zones at surface. And when I looked at the structural interp, I figured, I reckon that's going to be spodumene in the middle, because there was a creek running through the middle with the higher ends on either end, the lepidolite. So we mobilized ground penetrating radar really early, and that we fine-tuned that. We did some orientation because we already had mapped a lot of these lepidolites at surface. And bingo, when we got the results back, we had a 20 meter down to 50 meters, which is what we tuned the GPR to. So I'm pretty certain when we drill that, we'll see spodumene in the middle of that pegmatite, which is 20 metres wide. We've mapped it so far down to 20 metres, so we're pretty excited about what we can find at the drilling.
That's interesting because a lot of narratives out there that I've heard talks about that process of exploring, right, and the difference between lepidolite and spodumene, because that is why I get this. I mentioned this to you before in my previous conversations, that the lithium space is really 2 years old, whereas the rest of the commodities is centuries old.
Yeah.
So what we find here today doesn't, and what you don't find next door doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because no one's actually looked for it.
Yes, I think you'll find, the Yilgarn and the Pilbara are very different from an exploration discovery for lithium. The Pilbara, because it's virgin rock at surface and you don't have much regolith and development, what you see is what you get. So, the LCT, lithium, cesium, tantalum, if you look at Greenbushes, it was mined before the last century, right? So in the 1880s, it started off as a tin mine. It then became a major tantalum mine, and in fact, GAM, privately owned, world's leader of tantalum production, still takes their share of the tantalum that comes out of Greenbushes and process it, right? And it's now primarily a lithium mine. They're retreating the Tails Dam. I think that's a $2 billion project. They've just expanded their production. They produce something like, 27% of the world's lithium at the moment coming out of Greenbushes. So yes, you say it's different, but it's been mined almost continuously at Greenbushes for over 100 years, right?
Yeah.
In the Pilbara, if you look at Pilgangoora, again, that is a tantalum mine, again owned by Talison. GAM still have the rights to the tantalum there, but when they went and looked at the old core and some of the old drill logs, they realized they had lithium. When they started looking on surface, if you go back and look at the announcements that came out of Pilgangoora, originally they were all about lithium. However, when they started drilling deeper, below the surface, that's when they started finding the spodumene. So the spodumene really is a sweet spot. That's because most of the production facilities currently being built in Western Australia and already existing in China are designed and developed to treat spodumene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, it's fascinating because, for us here at Coffee Samso, we just want to know the ins and outs of the industry, right? And I think you're giving us an insight as to how it works, because everyone just sees the numbers. Oh, we've got this, we've got that, but no one actually talks about, well, how do you find it? I think that's
the price. Obviously, at the moment, it's extremely high, right? If you look at the cutoff grades being used for spodumene, I think for Pilgangoora it's $750 a ton of spodumene. Well, it's order of magnitude bigger than that. Close to 10 times that value at the moment.
Right.
And that'll obviously change, but long term, I'm saying, over the next 15 years, certainly will come down. This will be a commodity, and like most commodities, it'll be supply demand. But I think we're 10 years away from that, just because of the longer period it takes now for mines to get in production. I think the average brine deposit from discovery or decision to mine to production is 8 years. Right? And that's unique to the mines. Pilgangoora did a great job. Pilbara up at Pilgangoora, that really got into production 2.5 years, but they had an existing mine. The facilities were all there, the infrastructure was there, and then they obviously, when they found the spodumene associated with the tantalum deposits, slightly different. It's what we call fractionation. It's how the genesis of these LCTs, and as a chemical engineer, that's easy for me to understand, and maybe we can talk about that later. Where we're doing exploration in Southern Cross, that's very different. Our exploration technology and process there is really to go and look at all of the old gold historic mines, look where we had the pegmatites logged. Only about 3% of pegmatites in WA are LCT, so they're prospective for lithium. And so but at least you're looking at pegmatites from underground logging, often from the old timers. Then we look at the proximity to a granite intrusion, and generally you've got an old granite which has got lithium rich, you've had a new granite which has come up treated on that, cracked the older granite open, remobilized the lithium out of that, into that liquid solution. And as those rocks have gone along, they crystallize out in sequence. So the lithium, different from at the end, you tend to have the tin to start with and then the cesium. And the lithium comes out the end in what we call the Goldilocks zone. And you probably find that really in the 3 to 6 kilometers away from where the mineralization went into the greenstones. So although we find all these LCT pegmatites in the greenstones, they have to come out of a granite. So that proximity, and in WA, because the gold minerals or the gold mines and the gold resources were formed at about the same time as the LCT pegmatites, we tend to find them in the same place, although the genesis is totally different. So we're very lucky in WA. We've got this huge history of gold mining, and that gold mining has defined where we like to find the pegmatites. We then look at the proximity, because we've got such a good geological knowledge in Western Australia. Where we're looking in the Goldilocks zone, that's where we're likely to find the LCT pegmatites.
The pegmatites are an interesting sort of geological unit. They're almost like your beneficiating system, right?
Yeah.
Because all the stuff that doesn't fit everywhere goes out, and just so happens that lithiums and the tantalums and they sit in these units, right?
Yeah. Well, the majority of the pegmatites are barren, right? I mean, what we've noticed up at Tambora, for instance, we have a whole bunch of pegmatites running parallel to the structure, so parallel with the greenstones, and we call those G2, G1 up there. And then when we found the G2, and because the Pilbara is so old, it's been weathered flat on the granite, right? And you can literally see where the new granites come in, and you can follow the pegmatites, the lithium lepidolite in the pegmatites. It's very narrow, we're talking 0.5 meter wide, and you can literally follow it for a couple of 100 meters. As soon as it gets into the greenstones, it starts to broaden out. The lepidolite probably goes for another 100 meters, and then we know from our ground penetrating radar that then continues for hundreds and hundreds of meters. In fact, we've only done about, I think, 15, 16 kilometers of ground penetrating radar. We expected that the lepidolite wouldn't exist below the surface because there's no outcrop at surface, right? But when we got our results back, what we found was these pegmatite veins at the edge of the geophysics were still there. What we doubled. I think we had probably maybe 12 outcropping veins. We've now got 27 or 28 we've modelled, right? So we went back in the field and we said, okay, well, we would expect to find lepidolite here, but we haven't found it yet. But when we started looking around in the spinifex, between the spinifex, bingo, we find little piece of lepidolite. Not everywhere, but often we found it where we hadn't found it before. So I'm pretty confident when we drill below that, we'll find spodumene. And what we'll do is now go back there after this drilling program, and actually I've got another R&D program on using Professor Dr. Marcus Sweetapple, because we're trying to work out where we think the sweet spot is. Okay, how far away from the genesis, and do we think we find the sweet spot with the spodumene? We know we can probably reduce our drilling cost by 7-fold because we know exactly where to drill. And I'm not a geologist, I'm a chemical engineer, but I had a huge success in Africa. This is probably 14 years ago. We mobilized VTEM for the first time out of Canada. And again on an old deposit, and we had this bullseye. We drilled it, within 5 meters we hit, I think, 4 meters of 2% copper and 1.5 grams gold. And on the back of that, I jumped in a plane, I flew to Switzerland, and 48 hours later I came back with 30 million from Glencore. And we drilled out that deposit. So the beauty of these geophysics when it works is you know exactly where to drill, and very quickly you can have an exploration target, right? Because all you're now working out is tenor and width. And then you're drilling, infill drilling, without even having defined it, because you're drilling on the structures and the systems that you know is there.
Looking back to you mentioned your previous times using geophysics, and today, if you had to measure the efficiency, effectiveness of geophysics today, what would you say? Is it 10 times better? Like, is it significantly better?
I think, we had a lot of success using deep penetrating seismic, right, out at Queen Lepage. We got constrained by other issues. You need to have a whole bunch of vectors line up. The beauty of geophysics when it works is you've got a really good idea, depending on what, is it VTEM or EM or whatever it is, but you have a very good idea of a 3D model subsurface that you're targeting, right? So very quickly it gives you an idea of scale. If you take a case in point, we still haven't got our assay results back from our geochem. We did an orientation on geochem. Fortunately, we've been able to map these pegmatites at surface. Tambora, we've got 28 kilometres of strike length between the greenstones. We've got, on the west, we've got the Tambora Dome. On the east, we've got the Shore Dome. We haven't even looked at that side yet. I know it's mineralised somewhere in that because just to the northwest is a whole bunch of historical tin mines.
Yeah.
So we've done the geochem, we've expanded the stream sets, but I haven't got the results back yet. But because of just the mapping and the geophysics, we're able to start drilling. When we get those geochem results back, if that works out, we'll then probably have a massive expanded geophysics program. Massive. We only took, I think, 800 samples geochemistry, right? We've only explored so far, I think, less than 4% of the tenement. So, it just allows you to be a hell of a lot smarter and save money. And in our case, we've, within 6 months, we're drilling, right? That wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have had the confidence to drill without that ground penetrating radar.
People used to say copper is where you find it or where you see it.
Yeah.
Can we say that with, just following on your what you've been talking about, like if you're seeing lepidolite, then can we use that analogy?
The LCT model is still a little bit, there's some question marks because it doesn't really fit Mount Holland, perhaps. It doesn't really fit Greenbushes, we know, which are two huge big deposits. I dare suggest that if we, so some people are saying you need some bigger structures there before you get these big lithium mines. However, in our case, the model's working perfectly. And because the model's working, it makes it a lot easier because you follow the model. It's McKinsey's, right? If you talk to people who worked at McKinsey's, they're doing a management consultant, their strategy, what's the problem here? They very quickly generate a hypothesis. They test the hypothesis. If the hypothesis works, they implement the management plan, right? Which means you can do it a lot quicker and more efficiently. And it's the same with exploration, right? If you have a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis and it works, well, mate, you're off the races, right? And in our case, if this drilling program proves our hypothesis, well, we're off to the races. We've got a very big tenement package. As long as we've got the tenor there and it's spodumene, and from a metallurgy point of view, it's relatively easy to mill and extract, right? Either flotation or a gravity type circuit.
You got projects in Southern Cross, Marble Lock, next to Mount Holland. And then if you look at you got Mount Holland, you got Mount Ida, and what you guys have there, and then you got the ones in the Pilbara. And there's, as you said, there's an association with granites and gold mines.
Yeah.
How loosely can we use that analogy that that's if you find a gold mine or gold system with lots of granites, because they're always associated with that, is it that you could say, hey, this is a damn good place to go looking for these kind of potential pegmatites?
I think the Goldilocks zone being 6 kilometres from the granites, whereas I think gold can concentrate a lot further away, right? But it's different, right? So the lithium concentration in the spodumene is the crystallization within the pegmatite, whereas a lot of gold deposits is remobilized gold, and then through chemistry it then precipitates out.
Okay.
The reason I think you find the two together is structural.
Yeah.
But I'm not a geologist, right? So that's my hypothesis, but it works for us with lithium. So we've targeted the Southern Cross Belt, and what I like about that, it's very long and thin, and you've got the right source of granites on either side, and the greenstone belt's not normally more than 6 k's wide. So within that zone, you've got a very good chance, if you find the right pegmatites, that you're going to find the spodumene mineralization.
Let me ask you a question. Because we had so little understanding of how of discovery of work in the lithium exploration space. So we know LCT are the ones that you want, and there's certain percentage. At some point, can we then say, maybe we got that not quite right. Maybe it's not 3% of all pegmatites are LCTs. Maybe it's actually 10% or 15%.
Mate, it's outside my my knowledge base, right?
Yeah.
What I do know, though, is fortuitously in the Southern Cross region, because there is so much data, we know where the pegmatites are from all the gold drilling. It's just a matter of going and look in the core shed if they exist, or where the rock chips are in the trays, and if it's the right stuff, you'll find it.
Okay.
It's actually quite difficult to differentiate the actual crystal minerals from quartz or feldspars or a lot of the other stuff, and you can't use an XRF because lithium's too light. You just can't detect it. But with the PXRF now, and for a particular area, we are able to now predict pretty accurately what the lithium's likely to be based on the associated other minerals like rubidium and cesium, which is obviously a huge difference, right? From waiting 6 weeks and $35-$40 for the assay, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things, I think, and the knowledge base in WA in the last 6 years has exploded, right?
Yeah, I think it's like everything else. When there's a market demand for something, then that knowledge base is a factor of that too, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we have a very transient geological workforce here, a lot of consultants, and so that knowledge base disseminates across the industry very, very quickly.
So for us, I guess investors, we look at stuff, and I've always, this is one of my not pet peeve, but pet sort of questions is, how do we evaluate an announcement or a project? Are we talking grade? We're talking volume, we're talking about infrastructure, and then we talk about ability to extract the metal out. Can you give us like a round takeaway for us?
I think with the LCTs, you've got to look at what people are reporting in terms of the minerals and the ratios. I mean, we know, for instance, that we were going to find spodumene at depth because of the ratios of the other minerals associated between the lithium and the rubidium, for instance, right? Whether that proves correct or not, I'm not sure, but I know that people to the north of us in the same system have found spodumene. I didn't really worry about looking for it too much because, as far as I was concerned, the vectors all lined up. We'll just drill and we'll find it, right? It's a bit like gold. It is complicated, right? But grade is king. Okay, and size is king.
Yep.
So if you've got a big system, you've got the grade. In this market, it'll get developed into a mine as long as you can get the permitting.
Yeah, I remember talking to mining geologists, and they always said that, give me 50 meters at a small number, then 2 meters with a big number, which is a grade, and that's how they sort of measure it, right? Because if I'm going to mine it, I'm going to have to mine 50 meters or 100 meters, and if there's an average grade of 1, for example, or 2, it's a lot better than 2 meters at 50, I guess.
Yeah. I was in the marketing business of marketing, lead, zinc, and copper concentrates for a long time, and I used to travel to Japan and Korea and all over the world, And I think when it comes to lithium, in a bear market, a lot of Australian companies got into trouble because, there was a lot of lithium out there that wasn't quite on spec, and at that stage, the buyers of the lithium concentrate, you could reject your product based on not meeting spec, right? And a lot of people got into trouble. I think we're likely to be in a bull market for the miners rather than the processors for the next 5 to 6 years. maybe in 10 to 15 years' time, you'll have to start worrying again about the impurities, because those penalty elements might start penalising you. Because like most mineral refiners, the cost is in removing the impurities rather than processing the core product. Okay, and when everyone's short of concentrate, they'll take anything because the refiners are making good money. But in a market where there's oversupply, they start getting picky, because actually it's their cost of processing that determines their profitability or not.
Okay.
But I think we don't really have to worry about too much about the metallurgy side of, as long as you've got spodumene, it's going to make grade for the next 5 years plus and be profitable.
Going back to your projects, I guess, you're about to drill.
Yeah.
You've I think you made an announcement that you've got the contractor and things like that.
Yeah.
Drilling pegmatites are quite shallow most of the time. Is that the norm? Because some pegmatites do go quite deep, right?
Yeah, well, if you look at Mount Ida, which is red dirt, right? That's a deep pegmatite, but it was discovered through reassaying historical drill core from the gold mine. The grade's good enough, and at these prices, and with the infrastructure already in place, it makes economic sense as an underground gold mine. Underground lithium mine.
Yep.
The reality is we've never really looked for pegmatites. It's always cheaper and quicker to mine an open pit than an underground. So I think what you'll see first cab off the rank in Western Australia for the next 5 years, mostly going to be open pits. That's not to say, however, that some of those won't become underground gold mines in the future.
Underground lithium mines.
Lithium mines, my apologies.
I think would it be fair to say that if we go back to the 70s, 80s, when we started finding supergene gold in the gold fields, it was all open cut, and then suddenly as we progress with time, you see more and more underground mines, because that's where they are as they extend.
I think, if you look at the gold mining in Western Australia, there were two things that happened, right? The first was the ability to extract oxide gold using carbon, right?
Yep.
That was a Gencor out of South Africa's invention, which as soon as they discovered that in Western Australia, they realized they could make money of 2 gram oxide gold. Well, it's less than that now, but at the time it was about 2.
Yep.
So it was a combination of the gold price no longer being $30 an ounce, under the global gold agreement, and that technology, which is why we suddenly had all these mines. Once you've got the knowledge and the expertise, well, then you start refining the higher grades and you can go underground. I think with lithium, it's not quite the same, because the process to extract that is expensive, it's capital intensive, and it's really complex. So, but we're really, really short of lithium right now, and that's going to be in place until every car's an EV battery and we've got 100% recycling. And I don't know how long that's going to be, but I think it's probably 15 years' time. And if you're not the lowest cost producer, then you'll be out of business.
Yep, that's the simple rules of business, isn't it?
Yeah.
Your board, can you talk about the board, the people on them?
Yeah, so we've got a very efficient board structure. Our chairman, Dave Linegas, is very well known. He's a very good promoter. I tend to be a little bit more conservative and not as extrovert. And so Dave and I work very, very well together as the CEO and executive chairman. And then I've got Simon Andrews, who's worked as a broker all his life, but his background is a chemist, so he understands the business we're in really well. And we've got Xavier, who's a very good geologist, so it's very tight. We've got an excellent company secretary and owner, and the four of us work really well together, so WhatsApp, and we talk every day on WhatsApp, and which means we're all in the loop and we can make decisions very quickly, which is what you have to be in this market to keep, that's how we've managed to go from discovery to drilling in 6 months.
Before we go to news floor, I think one of the things, I'm asking this question because we've had conversations before about this. The lithium market, what's your view, where it is now, where it can go? Can you just narrate us with something there?
Yeah, well, I think
crystal ball question, obviously.
Benchmark minerals, are probably the best to answer that question, right? And I think they're predicting we need 30 more green bushes. We need 12 a year, I think, for the next 5 years, right, to meet demand. Well, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, well, no.
Okay, so, and the lithium market, there's no substitute for lithium in the EV business, right? It's a bit different for cobalt and nickel and a lot of the other minerals, right? Manganese, because there's substitution and you can mix and match, but you can't replace lithium. So I'm a huge lithium bull, at least for the next 10 years. I think in 25 years' time we'll be oversupplied and it will no longer be as exciting. Obviously you'll have a lot of leakage. But if you look at lead now, lead's not really used in industry anymore. I used to market lead concentrates 20 years ago. These days, lead batteries, we have about 70% of lead consumption is from recycled lead. Lithium's a lot harder, of course, so I think it'll probably end up something like 60% of lithium. So how long is it going to take for the EV revolution to take place? I don't know, 10 to 15 years before we see the end of this boom in lithium.
I mean, if you are talking about having 12 green bushes, and we know that's very hard. Green bushes is very unique.
It's a black swan event.
Yeah.
Right? 2% or whatever it grades in the size.
So the current price of lithium must be significantly more than what it is today if you can't achieve that.
Yeah, for any prospective lithium producer, we get calls every day from, you name it, China, Vietnam, South Korea, increasingly now Europe. We've seen a whole bunch of motor car manufacturers invest directly into mining companies. That's unprecedented. It just shows you the criticality of lithium, and it ain't going to change for a while yet.
Yeah. News flow. What's going to happen?
Well, we're drilling starting November, assuming we don't get an early cyclone or something in November. Who knows with the weather these days, but that's the only thing that can really stop us. We've just done a heritage clearing a couple of weeks ago. We demarcated the road, which is fortunately it's gazetted road because this was a gold mining area 120 years ago. So we'll start clearing the drill pads and the tracks next week. At this stage, we mobilised to come in to drill, but the drill rig's going to be drilling for 3 companies up there. We've earmarked 2,500 metres of a 7,500 drill metre program for ourselves. Hopefully we'll complete that before Christmas. And then we'll go in, and that's primarily focused up at Bengal. In the new year, we'll hopefully get our logistics in place to be able to access line. So that's all the Tambora area. Down at Southern Cross, we're really still in ground accumulation stage, and we're mining primarily databases in historical gold mining areas, databases rather than doing greenfield exploration. I'll give you an example, for instance, down at Mount Holland, where we right next to the SQM Wesfarmers operation. There's a drill hole there drilled in 1994 by Normandy. It hit pegmatites from 14 metres for 30 metres below surface, and from the historical Kidman geochem sampling, there's a bullseye geochem sample straight over the top of that.
Okay.
So as soon as we can, we've got a heritage clearance so we can drill. We'll drill that. Who knows if that's mineralised or not. But what we're trying to do at the moment is get into the Bounty, well, we have rights to get into the Bounty core shed and see if we can find the rock chips from that RC drilling program from 94. If we can find that, where we don't have to drill the holes, we'll be able to test those rock chips for lithium. So that's probably the model we'll be adopting, and we've got a lot of exciting acquisition bolt-on opportunities we're looking at in that Southern Cross belt.
Okay. Why Riversgold?
We lithium in a tier 1 jurisdiction. My background is developing gold mines rather than exploration. We've got a good exploration team, we've got good tenements, so I think we're into our first project, Tambora's not necessarily our best, but it's first cab off the rank. I think we've got a better than 80% chance that our hypothesis will come good, and we'll know that within 6 weeks. In the Yilgarn, which currently is, produces 51% of the world's lithium, we've got a whole bunch of new lithium mines coming on stream, and we think with our M&A team and the work we've been able to demonstrate, we've made a lot of acquisitions and done a lot of deals in the last 4 months. We've still got a lot in the pipeline. We'll put together a really good package, and we'll start there when it gets too hot and wet in the Pilbara. So come December through till May, we'll get on the ground, and hopefully we'll have a lot more news flow coming out of our Southern Cross Belt.
Okay. Julian, it's fantastic. I mean, this is one of the best lithium educational videos we've done. Really appreciate your time. I've done a collaboration with Florence Drummond, who is the founder of Indigenous Women in Mining Resource Australia.
I know Florence very well. I've spoken to her, and I'm a huge admirer of her.
Well, she and I have come up with this coffee package that we give to happy victims of Coffee with Samso to take away as a token gift.
Thank you very much.
And look, I'm happy that you come and we can talk, and I hope that successful the drilling, and we'll follow your story.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the time, Noel.
All right.